So we're studying now the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Reish Ayin Aleph, Sif Beis, which you'll see here on page Chaf. And we'll see the Magen Avram, we'll see the Chassam Sofer. Noshim Chayovos Bekiddush. Afal Pishi Mitzvah Saseishas Man Groma. De Iskash Mishum De Iskash Zocher L'Shama. Bahani Noshi Hoil Visnayu Bishmira Snayu Bischira. Umotzios Es HaNoshim Hoil V'Chayovos Min HaTorah Kamosam. A woman is obligated to the mitzvah of Kiddush, and the Magen Avram writes that the mitzvah of Kiddush is Doraisa. And that mitzvah could be fulfilled even without Yayin. So that according to the Magen Avram, the mitzvah of Kiddush splits into two. On the one hand, the Kiddush itself, the recitation is Doraisa. But on the other hand, to require Yayin is only a rabbinic, it's only a DeRabanan. Now it comes out that according to this understanding of the Magen Avram, you could fulfill your mitzvah of Kiddush Doraisa in the Beis HaKnesses when you recite Ma'ariv, because in the Tfilas Ma'ariv there's a Kiddush, which ends with Mekadesh HaShabbos. Therefore, says the Magen Avram, the Midaraisa beKiddush HaOmer beTfilas Sagi, the Krok Siv Zochas Yom HaShabbos, Vayzei Zocher also. So the whole deal of reciting Kiddush at home, b'makom Seuda, ala Yayin, is all D'Rabbanan. And Chein Mashma b'Tosfos shekosu d'Rabbeinu Tam Misha Ein Lo Yayin Lo Yikadish Klal. He has no Yayin, he shouldn't make Kiddush. What does that mean? He shouldn't make Kiddush. V'kosher v'chiyakor mitzvah say Doraisa, because he doesn't have Kiddush, he doesn't have Yayin. V'od the Amrinon Kikidusha Afal Gav the Mekadesh Bitzlusa, he should Mekadesh Al Shulchano B'Makom Suda. So the Magen Avram says, how could it be that if he has no Yayin, he doesn't recite Kiddush? The answer is because he was already Yotzei his mitzvah of Kiddush in Tefillah. Now, if you take a look below the Magen Avram, there's a Machzis HaShekel. And the Machzis HaShekel fills in a little bit of what's missing in the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram doesn't actually quote the entire Gemara in Brachos, he just makes reference to it. And the Machzis HaShekel says, Hu bebrachos daf lamed gimel. And it says there that Anshe Knesset Gdola tiknu tfilos ubrachos. That the Anshe Knesset Gdola, they were the ones who instituted and established the tfilos and the brachos. And there's a historical change over the course of time. Mitchila kshalu mi Bavel, the people were very poor. So they made a takana that you could be Yotzei Havdalah and in Tefillah, and then Hashiru. Over the course of time, they had the wherewithal to buy wine. Kavu ala kos. So they shifted the Havdalah onto the kos. Chazru vehenu. At a later period of time, again, they became poor. Kavu b'tfilah. So they established that Havdalah should be recited again as it was originally in Tefillah. Atachon Antonim. V'heim amru hamavdil b'tfilah tzarich sheyavdil ala kos. So that it means that just because they established the Havdol and Tefillah, they weren't oker the previous takana of Havdol alakos. V'hadakami boile lashas hamavdil b'tefillah im tzarich lahavdil alakos v'yamalei Rava. Rava says, yes, even though you recited Havdalah in Tefillah in Ma'ariv, nevertheless, when you come home, you're going to recite another Havdalah alakos, ki Kiddush. And Rava argues that Havdalah is like Kiddush. Ma Kiddush afa gavda makadesh b'tzlusa, makadesh akasa. Just like in Kiddush, even though you were Yotze your mitzvah of Kiddush on one level during Tefillah, nevertheless you still have to come home and be Mekadesh HaKos. Af Avdol Nami, Afal Gavdi Avdu B'tzlusa, Mavdil HaKosa Ad Kan Lishonu. So the Magen Avraham is medayik from the Lashon HaShas, that the Gemara says that Afal Gavdi Mekadesh B'tzlusa, nevertheless you have to be Mekadesh a second time al HaKos. Hare, you see from the Gemara, the Karel Tefillah b'Shem Kiddush, that the Kiddush that he recited B'tzlusa, meaning in Shmon Esrei, was Kiddush, but he has to recite a second Kiddush ala kos. The Sphirole, the Gemara maintains that the Yotze Me'atorah, he can fulfill his mitzvah of Kiddush on a Daraisa level in Tefillah, and then when he comes home, b'makom suda, he'll recite Kiddush al Yain DeRabanan. Now, if you take a look at the Otzer Mefarshim, he quotes the Chassam Sofer. And the Chassam Sofer is bothered by the following. Can you be Yotze your mitzvah of Kiddush during Tefillah? After all, we paskin that mitzvah strichas kavana. And that would mean that the only way he could fulfill his mitzvah of Kiddush during Tefillah is if he has in mind not just the mitzvah of Tefillah, but also the mitzvah of Kiddush, because otherwise he doesn't have kavana, and we paskin the mitzvah strichas kavana. So therefore, tzarech lechavein b'tfilas Yom HaKippur bein b'chol bein b'Shabbos lotzes yedei zechira u'b'Shabbosos di alma lo yechavein lotzes b'tfilah k'dei sheyetze chovas Kiddush d'oraisa min hamuvchar b'makom sudal hakos. Says the Chassam Sofer that in Tfilas Yom HaKippurim, since there's no possibility of fulfilling Kiddush ala kos, we don't drink a kos, therefore he's left with Kiddush d'oraisa. But he's only going to fulfill Kiddush d'oraisa in Tfilah and mitzvah strichas kavana. So therefore when he davens Ma'ariv on Leil Yom Kippur, during the Shmon Esrei, he should have in mind that he's fulfilling Kiddush d'oraisa, an amazing Kiddush. They should print this in the Sidurim and the Machzorim for Yom Kippur to make sure people realize this. Secondly, he says that in Kiddush on a regular Shabbos, when he davens, he should have in mind not to be Yotzei the mitzvah of Kiddush. Why is that? I mean, usually we say that Zriza Makdimul mitzvahs, you want to take the first opportune moment that you have to fulfill a mitzvah. Then, here, it's better that he fulfill his mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush ala kos. Since the Rabbanan made a takana that Kiddush should be recited b'makom suda ala kos, it's better that instead of splitting the mitzvah into two, fulfilling the mitzvah d'oraisa in tefillah and then the mitzvah d'Rabbanan ala kos b'makom suda, it's better to collapse the two into one and to fulfill his mitzvah d'oraisa in the best way possible, which is the way that the Rabbanan want you to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, ala kos b'makom suda. Two amazing Kiddushim here in the Chassam Sofer. Now, if he'll have in mind during Tefillah not to be Yotzei, or alternatively, he didn't have in mind to be Yotzei, his mitzvah of Kiddush and Tefillah, then his chiyuv when he gets home is d'oraisa. his wife shares a chiv d'oraisa, and now they're both on the same level. He can be motzi her in Kiddush, and she can be motzi him in Kiddush. Otherwise, if he fulfills his mitzvah, d'oraisa of Kiddush, in Tefillah, then when he gets home, he's only chayav d'Rabanan in Kiddush halakos. She, on the other hand, is chayeves in Kiddush d'oraisa. And therefore, someone who's chayav d'Rabanan cannot be motzi someone who's chayav d'oraisa. So the Chassam Sofer here would offer a solution by having a negative kavanah during tefillah, meaning negative as far as the mitzvah of Kiddush. And if you look at the next page, which you'll have Chaf Aleph, he quotes a tshuva of the Chassam Sofer, and he writes that Kevan shetikdu Chazal Kiddush al yayin b'makom suda im kein kol mishi yodea sheyesh lo yayin v'suda yechaven atzmo shelo latzeis yidei chovasu b'tefillah. Once again, he should have kavanah not to be yotzei his mitzvah of Kiddush during tefillah. Even if you hold mitzvahs and tzrichas kavanah, nevertheless, if you have a negative kavanah not to be yotzei, so this would explain why the Chassam Sofer that we saw earlier on the previous page says that he should have kavanah shelo latzeis, because he wants to cover his bases, even if you hold mitzvahs and tzrichas kavanah, but nevertheless, if you have a negative kavanah, then you're not yotzei.
So this would suggest that some of us have not been doing Kiddush correctly for quite some time because we didn't have a negative kavanah during tefillah. And when we got home, we thought we were fulfilling the obligation for our wife and children.
Right. So that's what we're going to study now. How do you solve this problem that if he was yotzei his mitzvah of Kiddush d'oraisa during tefillah, according to the Magen Avram's diuk from the Gemara Brachos Lamed Gimel, how could he be motzi his wife who's chayav in a mitzvah of Kiddush d'oraisa? And again, one solution would be that of the Chassam Sofer, that he has a negative kavanah during tefillah. But if you don't have the negative kavanah during tefillah, we're going to have to find an alternative solution, you said, to how he could be motzi his wife.
Just to be clear, if he was yotzei his chiyuv d'oraisa in davening, he has no chiyuv at Kiddush. It's not a chiyuv d'Rabanan then al yayin. He's been yotzei his chiyuv, and there should be no chiyuv when he comes to Suda.
No, the Rabbanan established that even though you were yotzei, that was the Gemara Brachos, right? The Gemara Brachos asked the question in Avdollah, if he was yotzei in Atechon and Tan and Tefillah, does he have to recite a second Avdollah al ha-kos? And the Gemara said in the name of Rava that just like in Kiddush, although he fulfilled his mitzvah of Kiddush and Tefillah, nevertheless the Rabbanan obligated him in a second Kiddush, and this time over Yayin b'makom Suda, so to an Avdollah he needs a second Avdollah. Now we're on page Chaf Beis. And we're looking at the Magen Avram and Sivkot and Beis. Until now, we looked at the Magen Avram and Sivkot and Aleph. In Sivkot and Beis, on the words of the Shulchan Aruch Motzios es Hanoshim, he says that a woman could be motzi a man. He writes, Upasha de Katan Eino Motzi Isha. Okay, that's fine. A katan is only chayiv d'Rabanan if he's higiel lidei chinuch, and an isha is chayeves d'oraisa, so that the katan does not share a chiv d'oraisa with a woman, and therefore he cannot be motzi a woman. But that's not the main point. He says we ordinarily, and here we're moving on to the next page. Dafilu ben yu gimel shana. What happens if the boy is now 13 years of age? And you and I would have said that for sure he can be motzi. He can be motzi a woman because now he's bar mitzvah, and as a bar chiyuv he's chayiv in Kiddush d'oraisa on the same level as a woman. No. He says, you may have heard about this discussion about a bar mitzvah boy who reads the Torah on his 13th birthday or a day later, and people might be hushing, how do we know that he's really a gadol? Because shanim is not enough. You need shanim plus simanim. Nobody checked him out for simanim. Now, in the case of Kriyas HaTorah on Shabbos bar mitzvah, that's only a d'Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan rely on a chazakah that if a young man reaches the age of 13, we assume he has simanim. And there's no need to check that out. If, on the other hand, we're dealing with a doraisa, then we don't rely on a chazakah. We need bedika. We need to check out and be absolutely sure, guarantee, that he has not only shanim, but simanim. And here, since Kiddush for a woman derived from the hekesh of Shama v'Zachar is doraisa, if this 13-year-old boy has not proven that he has simanim, and we're relying on a chazakah, when it comes to doraisas, we don't rely on the chazakah that he has simanim. So the Magen Avram says that a 13-year-old boy cannot be motzi a woman, or at least besuffic whether he can be motzi a woman, to the mili doraisa lo samchinin achazakah shehevi shtei saras ad yismal iskanim. Unless he has, facial beard hairs, we have no reason to be sure that he has simanim, that he has shtei saras. And therefore, since hachiv is doraisa, he might be only a katan who's chayiv d'Rabbanan mitzad chinuch. He cannot be motzi a woman. So that's what the Machzis HaShekel always does. His super commentary on the Magen Avram is to fill in the blanks. And he fills in the blank again. He says, the B'mili Doraisa, he says, Afal Gav, Dili El, Kosav, Ramah, Le'inyan Tefillah Samchinin Ala Chazaka. That means that if he's 13 years old, we assume he has Shtei Saras as far as Tefillah is concerned. So he says that if he wants to be motzi someone else in Tefillah, that's fine, even relying on a chazakah that he has Shtei Saras. Why? Hainu dafka b'tefillah shehi d'Rabbanan. Now again, when the Machzis HaShekel says that Tefillah is d'Rabbanan, let's not make any mistake about it. The Rambam Shita is that Tefillah is d'Oraisa, but we're talking about the formal Tefillah as established by Chazal, the Anshe Knesset Gdola, in terms of reciting Shmona Esrei. So that the Katan, who now is 13 years old, and he wants to be Motzios in Tefillah, we don't have any knowledge that would tell us that certainly he has Shtei Saros. Nevertheless, we rely on a Chazakah that since he has Shanim, he also has Simanim. So that's as far as Tefillah d'Rabbanan is concerned. Then he goes on, he says the following. B'kosa b'sefer Eliyahu Rabbah, de'im ha'isha kfar hispalalo, shari. If she daven, the Noshim Tzidkonios will daven Ma'ariv on Leil Shabbos, and they recited Kiddush and fulfilled their mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush in Tefillah, according to the Magen Avram. Now she needs Kiddush al Yayin, that's only d'Rabbanan. With regard to d'Rabbanans, like the example of Tefillah that we mentioned earlier, we rely on a Chazakah. Harei min haTorah kvar yotzasa yedei chovasa b'Kiddush b'Tefillah im kein katan yochol lo tzia. Meaning, even if we assume, in the worst case scenario, that this 13-year-old boy does not have simona, which means he's still a katan, any katan can be motzi a woman who already davened. Now, this would solve the problem that we mentioned earlier. I don't know, Bruce, if you're still there, but you remember the problem that we had, that if the husband was Yotze with Tefillah in the Beis HaKnesses on a Doraisa level, when he gets home, he's only Chayav in Kiddush DeRabanan. How can he be Motzi and Isha? Well, one answer could be that she also davened. Okay, I'm not saying that that's going to cover all cases, but I'm just saying let's make a note of that. But at this point, the Machzah Shekel backs off a little bit. He retreats. Why? He says, even if she's a tzadekes and she davened Ma'ariv, mistama lo niskavna lotzeis b'tfilosi in kiddush. Who amongst the people, whether it's the men and certainly the women, that would have in mind that when they recite tefillah, they yotze kiddush? And if you remember, as we saw earlier in the Chassam Sofer, mitzvah strichas kavana. So she didn't have kavana to fulfill a mitzvah. She's still obligated in Kiddush DeRabanan. That's what the Machzah Shekel claims. Now, if you look at the bottom, the Otzar Mefarshim, he says, Im lo ispala isha arvis, if she didn't daven Ma'ariv, then she's chayeves doraisa in Kiddush. Aval im kvar ispala arvis, kvar yotze yidei chovasa, midoraisa. And that's based on the Magen Avraham that we saw earlier, that you can fulfill your mitzvah doraisa of Kiddush and Tefillah. L'chein katan ben Yud Gimel, motzia v'samchinen achazaka shemistoma hevi shtei saras, because Archiv is only DeRabanan. And therefore, even a katan who's less than 13 years old could be motzi and isha if she davened Ma'ariv. The Asi DeRabanan umafik DeRabanan. The im gama katan ispal arvis, then it becomes tarti DeRabanan, and he cannot be motzi and isha. So even if the isha davened Ma'ariv, and therefore her chiyuv drops down one level from doraisa to Rabbanon, the child is chayiv DeRabanan, but the problem is that the child did not, if the child, let's say, second, what's the cheshbon? The child also davened Ma'ariv. So whatever chiyuv we want to impose on the katan, if he already davened Ma'ariv, he fulfilled one dimension of that chiyuv, and we lower it to a secondary level of Kiddush DeRabanan. And he's a katan who in general in all mitzvahs is only chayiv DeRabanan. So we have here trei DeRabanan versus the woman who davened Ma'ariv, and she's got chad DeRabanan. And now we move on to page Chaf Dal. We're looking here at the Taz. The Taz describes a strange case, a scenario in which a man has two cups in front of him on the night of Shabbos. One is filled with yayin, and the other is filled with mayim. He picks up the wrong kos, recites Kiddush on a kos of mayim, and then when he finishes his Kiddush, all of a sudden he realizes, what do I have inside of this kos? I have mayim. And the Taz was asked this question, and by the way, it seems, if I read this correctly, that the Taz himself had this issue. He's not describing someone else's problem, but his own. And the question is, does he have to recite Kiddush again? Because he recited Kiddush on Mayim and not on Yayin. Maisa Boli Yodi, B'Medinas Marin, Shasisi, you see, he speaks in first person. Asisi Kiddush alakos, Hayisi Sover Shu Yayin, v'hoya mayim. Ubekli sheni shahoya od lefanai. He has another cup in front of him. Sheyesh bo yain. Ukvar amarti akiddush kulo. I completed the entire kiddush on the kos of mayim. Helesi bedati. Now watch the language of the Taz. Helesi bedaiti lechora. It sounds like the Taz is about to give us his first svara, but he's going to reject it. Let's see if this bears out. Lechora lishtos hayayin. Well, I have the yayin in front of me in another kos. I'll pick up the kos yayin, drink the kos yayin, and I'll be yotzei my mitzvah of kiddush. Shebekli hasheni v'tam de kiddush al yayin hu d'Rabbanan. Shedarshu v'asmachta zachrei l'yayin aval b'deraisa sagi b'amir l'chud. On a doraisa level, forget about the kos. So my kiddush was valid on a doraisa level, and now the Rabbanan require yayin. I'll drink now the kos of yayin. But notice that he's splitting it up into two. I mean, the Kiddush Doraisa was without a kos, because all he had was a kos of mayim. And now to fulfill his D'Rabbanan, he's going to take a kos of yayin. Very strange, no? It's like an odd kind of situation in which he's splitting between the Doraisa and the D'Rabbanan. And he quotes Tosfos in the name of Rabbeinu Tam and Arvei Pesachim that the Rabbanan made a takari should be Makadish al yayin. V'takanta lo hoisa el lahasmech hayayin lekiddush doraisa. What did the Rabbanan establish? That the Kiddush doraisa should be attached to a yayin. Ubazei yikayim a mitzvah. Aval im kvar yotza yidei mitzvah min haTorah lo itzrichu b'shvil hayayin lasos kiddush michadash. Whoa! Now we're in deep trouble. The Taz is claiming that when the Rabbanan established yayin, they did so for someone who has not yet fulfilled his mitzvah of Kiddush Doraisa. If you've already fulfilled your mitzvah of Kiddush Doraisa, argues the Taz, the Rabbanan are not going to ask you and require of you to make another Kiddush ala yayin. Can we accept that? Oh no. Because if that be the case, then according to the Magen Avraham that it was Yotzei and Kiddush in Tefillah, then there would be no takana to recite Kiddush al HaKos. No one says that. So what does it mean? Lo etzrichu b'shvil hayayin lasos Kiddush michadash. So one conclusion that we have to draw here is that the Taz does not accept the Magen Avraham. The Kiddush in Tefillah is not the Kiddush Doraisa that the Torah requires. Now, one way of explaining this, when we get to the Minchas Chinuch later on, is that there's no mention of Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim in Kiddush and Tefillah. If you open up your siddur, you'll see that the Kiddush and Tefillah, the last paragraph that ends with Mekadosh HaShabbos, in the Emtzois, the Bracha Emtzois of Tefillah, has no mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim, like our Kiddush al HaKos. Maybe. So therefore, he has not fulfilled his mitzvah doraisa of Kiddush against the Magen Avraham. But the Taz says he has not fulfilled his mitzvah of Kiddush DeRabanan. He recited the full nusach of Kiddush al mayim, and now the Rabbanan are not going to say, you know what, start again, go back to zero, and recite a second Kiddush in order to fulfill the requirement of Yayin. The Rabbanan established Yayin as an enhancement of the Kiddush DeRabanan, not as a separate chiyuv in and of itself. There's no independent machayev of Kiddush DeRabanan on a kos yayin, but rather the Kiddush which you recite for the mitzvah of Kiddush DeRabanan, that should have a kos shel yayin. And therefore, says the Taz, we're not going to require him to recite Kiddush again. Furthermore, says the Taz, take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch writes, and here we have to look in the second paragraph, Im nishpach hakos, so we're in the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Tes Vav in the middle. After he recited Kiddush, he knocked over the kos, and he hasn't yet drunk anything from the kos. Yovi kos acher mevarch labor priagaf ein tzarich lachzor lekaddish. Says the Taz, if the Shulchan Aruch is paskening that in nishpach hakos, before his te'ima, all he does is bring a kos, recite Bor Priyagofen, and drink it. He does not have to recite Kiddush again. So that even though he did not fulfill his mitzvah of Kiddush ala kos, because he didn't drink from the kos, nevertheless, we're not going to require another Kiddush. But who adinami b'kan, and here too, in our case of Mayim is no different than Nishpach, and therefore, Mali Nishpach v'lo shasa klal, Oshu Mayim v'lo shasa klal, sof lo yotzi de Kiddush al yayin. And nevertheless, he doesn't have to recite Kiddush again, because he was Yotzei Kiddush Dorais. V'chein Isa Betur, Simon Reish Samach Tes B'Shem, Rabbeinu Nisim Gon, or Nutroi Gon, I'm not sure which Gon, Shekosav Shechova Lishmoa Kiddush Bilvad, V'yotzei Af Below Te'im. So that I listen to your Kiddush, I don't drink from the kos, and I can be Yotzei. So you see that as long as there was Kiddush, you could be Yotzei. The Afshatur Tamalov Shom Hainamitam She'ein Shom Makom Sud. Okay, fine. So the Tur doesn't understand Rab Nitrunoi going because he did not recite Kiddush from Makom Sud. Shuvra isi din zeb piske mari simon kuf tes vav. Mizel lishona. V'amarti v'pshitus the yachzor v'yikadesh shenis al yayin. The mabakachim kiddush al yayin. Hu d'Rabbanan, even though the requirement of yayin is only d'Rabbanan. Hello, kama mitzvahs d'Rabbanan mevarchem aleim. In other words, in the case of Nishpach, he did not fulfill his mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Kiddush al Yayin. And don't tell me, well, it's going to be an extra bracha, and it's a bracha l'vatol. No. If he's chayav in the mitzvah of Kiddush d'Rabbanan, in this case al Yayin, then he'll recite a bracha, just like we recite a bracha on any mitzvah d'Rabbanan. V'atu, and here the Mari compares it to another scenario. Im taka b'tos b'Rosh Hashanah b'tkios me'umad. Is anyone going to argue that if he made a tos in the tkios to me'umad, which means the tkios d'oraisa, right? We have two sets of tkios. We have tkios to me'umad, which Just 1 second. I'm sorry. Right, we have. I'm sorry. The first set of tkiyos is called tkiyos demiyushav, and in tkiyos demiyushav he fulfills his mitzvah d'oraisa of shofar. In the second set of tkiyos, that's tkiyos dema'umad, otherwise known as tkiyos al seder habrachos, malchius, zichronos, and shofros. That's a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. Now, he blew tkiyos demiyushav, and impeccable, perfect, and he fulfilled his mitzvah of tkiyah d'oraisa. Now he gets to the tkiyah d'Rabbanan of tkiyos dema'umad, and he makes a mistake. So he asks a rhetorical question. When he gets to the second set of tkiyos, which are d'Rabbanan, he made a mistake. Are we going to say she'ein tzarich lachzor? That he doesn't have to repeat the tkiyos? And why not? Because whole cry yotzi yidei chol b'vin haTorah tkiyos demiyushav, the first set of tkiyos, he fulfilled his mitzvah d'oraisa. V'hani einon el midrabbanan havare lekem l'man di'omer hach. No one would claim that on the tkiyos dema'umad, if he makes a mistake, he doesn't have to repeat the tkiyos because they're only d'Rabbanan. And he fulfilled his mitzvah d'oraisa of tkiyos with the first set of tkiyos demiyushav. So it's crystal clear, kuliyama lo pliga, no one doubts this, that if he makes a mistake on the mitzvah d'Rabbanan level of tkiyos dema'umad, despite the fact that he fulfilled his mitzvah d'oraisa with tkiyos demiyushav, he still has to repeat the tkiyos dema'umad a second time around. And here too, says the Mari, in the case where he recited Kiddush and then he did not drink from the wine, it spilled, or in the Taz's scenario, it was mayim and not yayin, then we're going to require of him to fulfill his mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Kiddush al yayin. He already was yotzei his Kiddush d'oraisa with Kiddush that did not culminate in shtiyas yayin because it spilled or there was mayim. Who cares? Just because you fulfilled a mitzvah d'oraisa, therefore you're not going to fulfill a mitzvah d'Rabbanan? So let's just think for a moment about the argument, the analogy of the Mari to the case of shofar. The Taz's argument was that the Rabbanan did not establish a separate, brand new, independent mitzvah of Kiddush al Yayin. They presented the Kiddush d'oraisa with an embellishment, which would be, let's call it mitzvah min hamuvchar, that it should be al Yayin. That was the Rabbanan's requirement, but it wasn't a separate, independent chiyuv of Kiddush al Yayin. So argues the Taz. Now, again, you might ask, in Yiddish we say, was art mir? What would bother the Taz if he said another Kiddush? So let him go ahead and make another Kiddush. The answer is then it would be a bracha levatola, according to the logic of the Taz. Therefore, the Mari has no analogy to the case of shofar, because in the case of shofar, we're not asking for any brachos. We're just asking that he repeat the tkiyos dema'umad if he made a mistake in the tkiyos, and we want him to fulfill his mitzvah d'Rabbanan of tkiyos dema'umad. So basically, the Mari is making a leap of faith here. There's no fair comparison or analogy, because so what if he repeats his tkiyos dema'umad? He's not making a bracha. The Taz is arguing that if you're going to require another kiddush, that would be a bracha of Atola, because he was already Yotze his mitzvah of Kiddush DeRabanan with Kiddush al Amayin, or Nishmach HaKos. And to require another Kiddush in order to fulfill Yayin, that would be a bracha of Atola. And that's what I think he means over here when he says, Vani tamua ma'od al Rav hagadol anal, shahotzi mipiv dvarim ka'ele. How did he even say such a thing? Dema raya hevi mitkiya shofar, shesham ein tzarich bracha no sefes. No one's going to require a new bracha, Asher kinshanim and sosu tzivanu al tkiya shofar, or lishma kol shofar, for the correction of the mistakes that he made in Tkiyos de Me'umah. Sham ein tzarich bracha no sefes. Let him blow the shofar the whole day. What do I care? Shezeh vadai im taka betos v'gomer kol tefillah. We're not going to ask him to daven again if he only realized his mistake after he already finished davening. Well, his pal shenis the kaimelana brachos at kiyasei ma'akvin zeh. Vehi talmud aruch masha enken kan she yitztarich levarach shenis brichas hakidush v'yesh chashash brach levato. So let's just think for a moment if we can make some sense out of the Mari, because the Taz's argument is very, very powerful. Perhaps the Mari means to say the following. I'm just throwing this out there. That if the mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Tkiyos de Me'umad is meant to be a hashlama, to embellish the mitzvah d'Oraisa of Tkiyos de Meyusha, but it's all one mitzvah of Tkiyah, then why would we force him to repeat the Tkiyos de Me'umad a second time around if he made a mistake in the Tkiyos de Me'umad, once he has fulfilled his mitzvah d'Oraisa, Tkiyos de Meyusha? In other words, the enhancement of his mitzvah d'oraisa of shofar is through the tkiyos de me'umad as a hemshech, connected to the tkiyos de me'umad, to the tkiyos de meyusha. Once he makes a mistake, it's a ball game over, as we say. He can no longer embellish the mitzvah d'oraisa of Tkiyos de Meyusha. If he's already fulfilled that mitzvah, finished. End of game. But yet, we're going to require him to repeat the Tkiyos de Me'umad and get it right this time. Why? Because we see the Tkiyos de Me'umad as a separate entity. To fulfill that requirement, which was established by the Rabbanan, that our tefillah should be integrated with shofar, or say it the other way around, that shofar should be integrated into tefillah. So too, says the Mari, when the Rabbanan established Kiddush al Yayin, it's a new entity. And the Rabbanan are requiring Kiddush al Yayin as a D'Rabbanan. But the Taz is going to ask the Mari, are you going to say that if he finished the Shmon Esrei, he has to repeat Shmon Esrei? I mean, that far the Mari is certainly not going to go. But the Mari is making the following point, which I think is well taken, that the D'Rabbanan of Tkiyos de Me'umad stands on its own. And therefore the Kiddush al Yayin stands on its own. And on that, the Taz counters, well, why are you making this drawing this fancy, sophisticated conclusion that the Tkiyos de Me'umad stand on its own? There's no brach involved, so who cares? What do we lose We can only gain. It's a win-win situation. Omnom achar ha'iyun she'iyanti. So all this was, what was the language of the Taz? Helesi bedaiti l'chor. And the counter is achar ha'iyun she'iyanti. It's so interesting that the Taz presents his Havamina, defends it like a lion, and now he rejects what he said. Nira ditzarech lachalek b'dova, k'mo shavayr b'siyata d'shmai. Diyesh l'damos b'din zeh l'mashakosa b'simen reishayin gimel b'din kiddush b'mokom suda. The kaimel on sham, dim kiddush al das lechol kan, ubolo meis a sibo shetzarech lakar mimokom zeh. So he made Kiddush in location X, but he wasn't able to do Suda there. You know, a storm came and the weather conditions prevented him from establishing his Suda there. So what does he do? He's Oker Memkomo, and the Shulchan Aruch Paskin Tzorech Lachzor LeKaddish. When he gets to the final, landing port where he's going to eat his Suda, he's going to require a whole new Kiddush. So the first Kiddush that was Shalom Makom Suda was a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Kiddush DeRabanan. Because Kiddush DeRabanan doesn't require Makom Suda. The entire entity of Makom Suda is DeRabanan. I don't know how he knows that, but that's his premise. So now he's going to make a whole new Kiddush in order to fulfill the DeRabanan of Makom Suda. And we're not worried about Bracha Vatola. We see that Kiddush DeRabanan is a separate, independent entity, a takana v'chovas Kiddush, that generates a bracha, even if he has fulfilled his mitzvah of Kiddush DeRabanan. And this completely overturns everything that the Taz has said until now. The Afla Pirush Rashbam the Olef Le Mikra. The Rashbam in Psachim derives Makom Suda from a pasuk, and that pasuk is in Yeshayahu and Novi. It says V'karasol l'Shabbos oneg, and Chazal interpret this as Eno, as V'makom Kriya Shamtei oneg, or V'makom oneg Shamtei Kriya. Kriya is a reference to Kiddush. Ena el asmachta b'yal. V'afilu hachi tzarich l'kadesh shenis. Even though the drasha of the karasel Shabbos oneg, which generates a chiyuv of Kiddush Makom Suda, is only the abundance and asmachta, but nevertheless he requires a separate Kiddush b'Makom Suda, even though he was yotzei his Kiddush d'Oraisa shelo b'Makom Suda. Is hu adinami hacha the tzarich l'kadesh shenis al yayin. He requires another Kiddush al hayayin. Because the first Kiddush was al hamayim. Now this is, shall we say, Taz part 1. And from here until the end of the page is Taz part 2. So I'm not going to start part 2 now. It's very complicated. I do want to learn it with you, but I think we should leave it for next week. So let's make a note of where we got up to here. And let's see. What's the Hebrew date today? I like to use the Hebrew date. Rosh Chodesh was on a Thursday. So what today's Vav Teves. Does that make sense?
Today isn't Zion? It's Zion or something.
Today's Zion?
Rosh Chodesh was Wednesday last week.
Right?
Today is Ches.
So it's Chet. Because
Ches.
Wednesday last week
Sir,
was
a serve
Rosh
of potatoes
Chodesh.
Oh,
on
Rosh
Friday.
Chodesh was on Wednesday. I forgot.
Yeah,
Okay.
last Wednesday was Rosh Chodesh, so today has to be Chet.
A serve of potatoes is on Friday. It's 2 days before that.
So that means that next week will be the 15th of Teves, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what we'll do is next week in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll quickly summarize and outline the Taz, and then we'll see why the Taz rescinded his original position. Okay, then? And we have in this Kuntris, we're now on page Chaf Hey, and the Kuntris ends, I believe it's on Mem Gimel. I'm not sure that we're going to go through the entire Kuntris, because I do want to move on to the next Kuntris. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see what we can accomplish here. Okay, then? Now, there's a sefer here that he quotes called Derech Pikudecha. And if I'm not mistaken, please check me out on this. It was authored by one of the Hasidic Rebbeim, the Bnei Yissaschar, I think, but I'm not sure. So I'll add that to your homework for next week, and you'll let me know who authored the Derech Pikudecha. Okay, everyone, thank you so much, and we should hear good news.